She had everything people said money could buy: glass windows that drank in the dawn, a garden trimmed like a cathedral, a husband whose name opened doors. Yet in the past 3 months, 8 maids had quit, one after another. They left with their heads bowed, with boxes, with whispered apologies that felt like knives. Each resignation came with a different reason: too hard, too strict, the hours, but the pattern felt like a running stain across perfect wallpaper. She tried interviews, raised wages, hired an agency. Nothing worked. On a Thursday, after she found the ninth apron folded on a bed and a note that said, "I can't stay," she made an impulsive purchase and called the agency. She told them she needed someone reliable, someone who could handle the household for months without complaint. After they insisted on a trial, she said no. She wanted to know the truth first. She wanted to see what everyone who worked for her saw. So late that night, when the house smelled of lemon cleaner and the last chandeliers had been dimmed, she set up small cameras in the corners: kitchen, hallway, nursery doorways, places no one expected, places where nothing could hide. She told herself it was practical. She told herself she had the right to protect her home. But the motion in her chest when she clicked the camera on felt like something she had not been prepared for: guarded curiosity that tasted faintly of dread. The first footage was ordinary: footsteps on marble, the quiet hum of the espresso machine at 7, a young woman humming as she arranged cubed cheeses for the afternoon tea. Another made folding sheets like origami. There were smiles, there were sighs, small acts of care that glowed like honest coin. She watched herself present the household rules to a fresh-faced girl, watched her laugh at a joke she no longer remembered making. The house felt small on the screen, as if she were spying on a doll's world. Then, at 2 in the morning, something small and sharp happened. The toddler, her 4-year-old son, started to cry in his nursery. The camera in the hallway captured a figure tiptoeing toward the room, a girl who had only been with them for 2 weeks. She entered clumsily, her shoulder knocking the nursery door, her feet whispering. The child quieted in her arms. The girl sat on the edge of the bed and sang a low, off-tune lullaby that was not in any language she'd heard before. Her hands folded the child's blanket and tucked in the stuffed rabbit his grandmother had given him. At 3:12 a.m., the boy's bedroom door opened again. Not the girl's figure this time, but a small shadow that moved quicker than it should. The camera froze the moment. The boy, pale in the glow of the night light, yanked the rabbit from the crib, flung it across the room, and laughed. It was a sound that did not belong with him. He ran back into the hallway and took the girl's cleaning cloth, smeared it across a carefully folded pile of her uniform, and scrawled a stain with his small, precise hands. She felt ridiculous to be angry at a child, but what followed was a slow, escalating cruelty that made the screen almost unbearable. The boy began to test boundaries like a scientist and a sinner. He hid the girl's phone in a vent and in the morning accused her of stealing when she cried and begged the agency to help. He smeared jam on the kitchen counter and blamed her. He whispered in high school tones, coached his friends to call the girl names, and watched her face crumple like tissue. Once, he blocked the back door and let rain come in until her shoes were soaked, then told his mother the girl was careless. What the camera recorded over the next weeks was not a one-off prank, but a pattern of targeted humiliation. Small acts, each insignificant alone, became a web. A missing watch planted in her room, a dress torn and then blamed on her clumsy hands. Compliments withheld until the girl cried and apologized for things she did not do. The boy took pleasure in watching the fall, his eyes bright like someone seeing a magic trick succeed. The maid would stand outside the nursery for a moment, hold herself together, then slip away with the hollow look of someone who has been taught to apologize for breathing. On another screen, a different maid closed the pantry door, carrying a bag of groceries on her arm. The boy put his hand into the bag and rearranged the labels so that when she unloaded, spices were on the wrong shelf, jars misplaced. He told his mother later he had helped. The maid, embarrassed, left with a note: "It's just not me." She watched one girl sit at the kitchen table at dawn, head in her hands, and cry until the salt and tears crystallized at the edge of her palms. The footage captured the small things employers sometimes never see. The way someone pressed their thumb against a bruise to see if it was real, the way they inhaled the smell of the house as if trying to remember it in case they needed to leave. There were moments of sweetness too. The third maid, who stayed for almost a month, would braid the boy's hair on lazy Sundays. She would tell him stories she made up about a brave little mouse who taught dragons to be polite. For a while it seemed the child's mischief might be a phase, a pop of color in otherwise ordinary life. But then the mouse story was used as bait. The maid hummed it, and the boy mimicked her in front of friends, changing the tale to mock her accent. The girl laughed to cover her ears. The camera didn't lie. It offered clarity. It showed the boy following maids to the back steps and watching them fold linens like a hawk. It showed the way he would slip into the hallway to find things to test them, as he told his mother, when testing meant creating traps. It showed, at the end of another week, the ninth maid gathering her things in silence, leaving a small note on the kitchen counter that read, "I do not want to be here when things happen." By noon on the 10th day after installation, she had watched an entire catalog of small cruelties. She replayed moments until they smeared into one another, and then she realized there were other times when the maids had been forced into impossible choices. There was a night one girl was left to watch the boy while his mother went to a gala. The house alarm died, the husband was away on work, and the phone line cut out because of a storm. The girl rang every service number she could, and none answered. At 1 a.m., exhausted and terrified, she let the boy sleep on the couch because his fever climbed. When the mother came home, she saw the house out of order and accused the girl of neglect. The footage was surgical. The camera didn't capture whispers behind curtains, the conversations that might have painted the maids as unreliable, only the facts. But the facts were enough. The maids weren't leaving because of money. They were leaving because their dignity was being worn away, bead by bead, by a child whose cruelty was a mirror for something else in the room. She paused the video, and the living room felt suddenly too big. There are names for the things she saw: bullying, humiliation, gaslighting, but none of them had a language soft enough to cover what she felt. The sharp intake of air when a mother discovers her child on the wrong side of a line she thought she had drawn years ago. When she confronted her son the next morning, he looked at her as if she had made the accusation out of a fever dream. "They always leave," he said, that casual, cruel shrug of a child who has been indulged. "They get tired." His voice was small, practiced. He denied planting the watch, denied smearing jam, denied making calls to the agency. He said his mother was being paranoid, that maids came and went from everyone they knew. But the footage kept its steady truth. There was the lullaby between his hands and her neck, an exchange that had been tender and then weaponized. There were tears, and there were the hushes that made the staff into creatures living on the edge of being called irresponsible. She did something that felt like undoing and like beginning over. She called the agency and told them to send the ninth maid back with lunch and with a new contract. She sat on the stairs when the maid returned, her hands folded on her knees like someone who was meeting an old friend. She didn't start with questions. She started with apologies. She told stories about the camera with an honesty she had avoided until that moment. The maid listened, quiet and wary. She told the woman, her employer, the one who paid her, that she had been ashamed and frightened of losing a livelihood. "I'm so sorry," the employer said. "I didn't know. I thought I had done everything right." The maid's eyes sharpened in a way that was not hostile. "Sometimes," she said, "it's not only what you do. It's who watches." What followed was messy and human. She learned how the agency treated the maid's complaints like background noise, how some of the girls came from places where leaving a job meant walking into poverty with nothing to cushion the fall. She learned that culture and shame and pride were like tides. Sometimes they rose and swept a person out before anyone noticed. She made promises. She instituted a new rule. No child could be left to play with pranks that targeted another person. Pranks would be replaced with chores that taught humility, gardening, helping to cook, tasks done side by side with the staff. She hired a child counselor and sat through 3 sessions where the therapist explained the difference between childish mischief and deliberate cruelty. She discovered that children who test boundaries are often responding to unexpressed feelings: jealousy, attention-seeking, the mimicry of behavior they have seen. The husband's reaction was quieter, more practical. He paid for anger management classes for the boy the way he paid for tennis lessons. He offered financial settlements to agencies and paid extra for longer contracts, thinking wages solved everything. But the woman started with herself. She realized, in the unspooling hush of late nights, that her definition of discipline had until then been a mirror of her own upbringing. Strict, polished, instructed through silence. She started to practice listening, small and consistent. She asked the maids to teach her their names and the names of their children, to say them out loud and mean them. She left notes by the tea kettle. "Thank you for what you did today." A small phrase, a tiny currency of recognition. Slowly, the atmosphere of the house shifted. The boy's laughter grew less sharpened at the expense of others. He learned to fold napkins as a game and to name the maid's favorite foods. He still tested limits, but now he tested them with the gentle curiosity a child should have. There were setbacks, a plate broken in a moment of impatience, a harsh word flung too fast. When those happened, she called the maid to the table, all of them, and they spoke. There were rules about apologies, not just a muttered "I'm sorry," but a named acknowledgement of what had been done and what would be done to make it right. On a rushed Tuesday evening, months later, she sat alone watching footage again, this time not from secret cameras, but from a phone she had been given by one of the former maids who had returned. The girl, who had once left with her bag and a trimmer in her hands, had filmed a short clip of the boy helping her plant a lemon tree in the garden. The camera was shaky. It caught the boy's hands in the soil, clumsy and sure. He laughed when the dirt smeared across his palms. The girl wiped his hands and then patted his shoulder, a motion as simple as a benediction. She wept then, not from shame alone, but from the relief of learning that humans could be changed by the same love and attention that broke them. She thought of all the maids who had left before truth had time to season into action. She thought of small acts of cruelty that had gone unnoticed in other houses, the way silence had protected bad behavior for years. She thought of how easy it had been to blame the missing money, the bad attitude, the hard work. The camera had shown her the last piece, the human responsibility she had ignored. At a dinner she hosted 2 weeks later, she stood up in front of the staff and spoke without a script. She said she had been wrong, and she said she was sorry. She promised better contracts, better pay, paid sick leave, time off, and a small fund for emergencies. She spoke about listening and not assuming, about naming things before they could fester. The maids listened, some with folded arms, some nodding with tears that glinted in the chandelier light. The woman who had returned, the one who planted the lemon tree, smiled in the corner, eyes steady. Her son came to the table and fetched water for the woman who had once cradled him at midnight. He did it with the slow focus of someone learning a new language. There were moments she wished she could erase, small arrows of regret that would always sit like pins in her memory. But then there were moments of redemption that felt quieter and more influential, a maid humming as she folded a towel and the boy joining in with a new tune, a repaired relationship between employer and employee that was not about transactions but about mutual care. One afternoon, as she walked through the garden, she found one of the old maids, the one who had left months ago, picking mint by the greenhouse wall. She paused before speaking, unsure if she had the right. The woman looked up and smiled, the kind of smile that understood what words could not fix. "I planted the lemon tree," the maid said, "for the child. I wanted him to remember that things take time." She let the words sit. They were not a balm for everything, but they were a start. She reached out and took the woman's hand, a small gesture across a wide distance of experience. In that hand was the truth she had been avoiding. That power had to be exercised with tenderness, that rules without context only made prisons of houses, and that watching without acting was its own kind of cruelty. When she later reviewed the first hidden tapes again, old evidence that had become, for her, a map of failure, she no longer felt only shame. She felt the accountability that made change possible. The camera had shown her the worst of what she had missed and, in doing so, had given her a way to set it right. At night, when the house settled and the garden swallowed the day, she would sometimes listen at the nursery door. She would hear the boy recite something he had learned from the maid who planted the lemon tree. "Respect," he said once in the dark, "is like water. You don't see it a lot, but everything grows because of it." She thought about how easy it had once been to believe that money fixed things. Now she knew better. Money could buy help, but it could not buy empathy. Empathy had to be learned, taught, practiced. It arrived in small things, a proper apology, a consistent schedule, a named acknowledgement of hurt. The cameras had not been her judgment. They were a mirror. What she did after she saw into it made all the difference.